afternoon. You're listening to Fresh Start Today. This is Jermaine Reed. I'm your host, and I have today in the studio with me some special guests. Dr. Ramel Smith, he's back with us. We're glad to have him. We have from the Maida House, we have Christine Alstrup, who is the Vice President of Clinical Services and Programs. So thank you for coming on today, Ms. Alstrup.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
And then we also have a graduate of your program, Ms. Erica B. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing great. Today we're going to be talking about the impact that drugs and alcohol have on family members. Our nation's number one health problem is alcoholism and drug dependency. I don't know too many people that will argue that point. And today we're going to talk about how this is a family disease. When one person is on drugs, it affects everybody in the family unit, regardless of your age or sex or gender, single couple, straight, gay, what have you. When one person's on drugs, everybody's on drugs. And when one person's recovering from drugs, the entire family is recovering from drugs. So we're going to talk about this because there are a number of children in all communities, African-American communities, the Latino, Hispanic community, Caucasian community. Drugs do not discriminate, or drug abuse and use does not discriminate. So we're going to talk about the impact that drug abuse and alcohol abuse has on family members. So when we come back after this break, we're going to start this conversation. If you'd like to join in, you can call 414-444-5250, 414-444-5250. And if you can't get through on the phone lines and you have a question or a comment, please feel free to reach us at Fresh Start 860 on Facebook, or you can tweet us at Fresh Start 860. Thanks a lot. My special guest is Christine Alstrup, and she is from the Maida House, and we have a graduate of the Maida House program, Erica B. We're going to be talking with them, in addition to our great friend of the program, Dr. Ramel Smith, who is a local psychologist. And everyone knows that this show is focusing on child welfare, foster care-related issues, and having experience working in the foster care community, there are a large percentage of children who come into care, who are in care, who comes from homes where there is the strong presence of alcohol and other drug abuse. And we're going to talk about the impact of alcohol and drug abuse and how it's a family disease. So welcome, Ms. Alstrup.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great having you. So you're from Maida House.
Yes.
House. How long has the Maida House been around? What services do you provide, and what does your clientele looks like?
Sure. So Maida House has been around since 1963, so that's over 50 years. And Maida House has always served women. So back in 1963, what was happening is that there weren't really services available for women, and most times when women had a problem with drugs or alcohol, and it was predominantly alcohol at that time, they really sometimes just ended up in jail until they kind of sobered up, and then they went back out into the community. So a woman named Maida Orth, opened up her home 50 years ago and started letting women come there. And at that time, it was just more support services and a place for women to kind of be with each other and help each other heal.
Okay.
And then over the years, we've evolved to really a state-of-the-art facility that still treats women to this day. That's our population.
Okay.
But then we also treat children. And so Maida House, I'll talk more about our programs, but we were one of the first programs in the nation to have children come to treatment with their moms. So we knew children or mothers sometimes weren't seeking treatment because they didn't know what to do with their children, and it was a barrier. And as you can imagine, leaving your child behind for you to get treatment just wasn't attractive to women. So we've started bringing women children in the late 80s. So right now, if we talk about the women that we're serving, we do serve a special kind of demographic of women. They tend to be, their annual income, 90% of them tends to be less than $20,000 a year.
Okay.
Most of them are homeless when they come to us.
How long can they stay in your program when they come?
Oh, it's in our residential facility, we like to say that women can stay as long as they need to be there. We try to, Maida House is very creative in their funding.
Okay.
So we write a lot of federal grants. We do a lot of fundraising.
Right.
And so we want women to be there as long as they need to be there. And, that can be anywhere from 30 days to a year. We just have somebody leaving us today who's actually going into our housing program who's been with us a year. She gave birth to her baby.
Oh, wow.
Several months ago, a good, healthy baby, and one of her other children is with her also in treatment, and so they're moving into our housing program. We have a housing program where we have 27 units of sober housing.
Okay. So when you say sober housing, what does that mean exactly?
That means that on that facility, it's like we call it a little campus, you need to not use drugs and alcohol there,
Okay.
and we support you in doing that. So most of our women are continuous to be in services with us as they're living in the sober housing. So I talked a little bit about a residential program, our housing program, and we also have an outpatient program where we serve 120 to 150 women at a time.
120 to 150 women at a time.
On our census for our outpatient program,
Okay,
yes.
for outpatient program.
Yes.
Okay. Now, you said that 50% of the women who are in your program are homeless. 99% of them have a annual income of less than 20,000. Are there any other demographics or statistics that are, important for the listening audience to know about?
Yeah, I think that our listening audience needs to know that, as you said, substance abuse affects everyone. So it's not one ethnic background. So we know that right now 52% of our women are Caucasian, 41% are African American, and about 2% are Native American.
And that's interesting. The reason, and I'm glad you brought up the whole racial composition piece, because I think it is important to know who are served, which individuals are served by what programs, of people looking for resources. It's good to know that they're where to go. And I remember when I initially reached out to the Maida House to be on the program, I had inquired about, the racial composition of the folk that are served, the women who are served by your program. And I also inquired about the composition of the board of directors. Was it reflective, racially reflective of the population that is served? And so I was really glad to hear that you do have a very diverse board of directors.
We do. And we try to get client input as well. So at many different levels, it's not that someone who's in treatment is going to be sitting in on our board meetings. However, we often do focus groups with our clients to get their input into what works and what they like, and because it's important that people like treatment, they're not going to come. It's a hard thing to face, so we want to have a program. So we not only do we consult with our current clients, we're also talking to. We have a graduate with us. We're in contact with our graduates to find out what was good for them, so they're represented.
One statistic that I saw that you had shared was that 91% of the women who you work with have experienced some form of trauma in their life, and that a large percentage of the ladies in the program, or actually those who use drugs or alcohol, have had an experience of sexual trauma in their lives.
Yeah, that's true. Often we know that, so we see the data on that, so we know that 91% of our women report that they've had some sort of trauma in their lifetime. Oftentimes, that's childhood sexual abuse. And as you can imagine, if something happens to you as a child that traumatic, that's going to change how you see the world and how you are in the world and how you're able to cope in the world. So, oftentimes, substance abuse really is a coping mechanism from something else that's going on.
Something deeper.
Sure.
And so, do you think that sometimes in programming we have a tendency to hack at the leaves versus getting down to the root issues of what's really, going on?
I think that can happen. I think I'm pretty proud of the fact that we don't.
Right.
Yes.
Right. But that has happened. Do you see women who have come to your program maybe from a different AOTA program or have matriculated through multiple programs, whether locally or abroad? At what point do you think, and maybe it's at different rates, that a person actually they get the help they need? Is it possible that you have to go through multiple treatment programs?
Well, you don't have to go through multiple treatment programs. The reality is, substance abuse and addiction is it's a chronic disease. It is a disease. It's a brain disease.
Okay.
And, you don't often or always get fixed the first time around, okay? So I think you got two parts in your question there. Part of it was, do treatment facilities see the whole person and understand that substance abuse is just a symptom of something else going on. And I think the field is really seeing that, and there's knowing that. I think in the old days that wasn't always the case. People didn't understand addiction as a disease. They looked at it as more of a moral failing. And you can just say no to drugs, and you can just stop, and it's your fault you can't stop.
Okay.
But the more we get the public educated and people understand the devastation of this chronic disease, that helps in many ways. You can help with the stigma, so people just have a disease and they seek treatment.
Okay.
But I do think that the mental health profession, the substance abuse profession knows now, or most of them know, that we need to treat the whole person.
The whole person. With that piece right there, do you think that drug abuse, alcohol disease is very generational?
It can be. It doesn't have to be.
It doesn't have to be,
Yeah.
but do you see? I mean,
Yeah,
what is
we
the data
do see
research?
that. I mean, we do see that. So we know that children that come from households where there's substance abuse are more likely. There's data in there. Are more likely to start using drugs and alcohol. And why is that? One, they learn that it's a coping mechanism. They see their parents do it, even though they have a sense that it's not healthy. You still learn that.
So is it learned behavior? Is it what, environmental, biological?
It's all that.
It's all of that.
It's
It's all of that.
It's
Wow.
all of that.
And so.
No, I was just going to say it's a combination of nature and nurture. You have some genetic predispositions from a hereditary standpoint, but then also from a social learning standpoint, what you see mom do, what you see dad do, you're more likely to imitate.
So how does the Maida House focus their work to end the generational cycle of substance abuse, this vicious cycle?
Yeah, we're really proud of the fact that, and we're really good at getting the whole family involved. And, the fact that we bring the children in, we're able to provide services for those children. So we have lots of services for our children.
Like what? What are some of those services?
So one thing, the parents are learning, the mothers are learning how to be better parents, so the basics of parenting, and then learning how to nurture their children and knowing that reattaching to their children. The children themselves, we have family therapists on our staff, we have child therapists on our staff, we do individual parenting with the children, we do therapy with the children. And I'll tell you, especially in our residential, when the kids get into that residential facility, just providing them with the structure of what's happening in residential can be very healing.
Okay.
So we're looking at, that next generation by getting that family unit whole again, that's going to help with that next generation. We also involve all the family members in treatment. So we have opportunities for all the family members to come, and we might not do treatment for all those family members, but we'll make referrals if necessary.
So when you talk about the whole family again and treating the whole family, involving them in the therapeutic process, do you ever run into situations, and maybe this is not a very good question, but I think it needs to be asked. Do you ever run into situations where one family member is ready and the other family member is not ready? And how does that impact, the ability to end the generational cycle or to have a very good or a healthy therapeutic process?
And I'm not sure if you mean by, are they ready to join in their family member who's struggling, or they have their own substance abuse addiction?
Join in, right, because it has to be a team effort, I think.
It's very helpful if it's a team effort. Sometimes, the reality is when someone's been using substances for a long time, your family members get burnt out because they're tired of hearing that you're going to work at it or address it, or they don't understand that it's a disease, and they really do think all you have to do is say no. And so they might not be ready to join and be that support person yet. But we hope by giving the opportunity to give the family members some education about the disease, to try to make it welcoming and friendly and non-judgmental. One of the programs we do is called Celebrating Families, and it's an evidence-based 16-week curriculum where what happens is everybody starts out with a meal, and the family has a meal together, and then they divide up into age-appropriate groups, and everybody's learning about how substances affect the family, coping skills, and gives them a chance to talk about their own experiences. So the parent is able to talk about it, the loved one's able to talk about it, the children are able to talk about it, So that provides that space to make it safe to address it.
So the family's involved, and we have this process where everybody has been infected in some kind of way, and so basically substance and drug abuse. And I want to clarify that because we often hear alcohol separated from drugs. Why is that? We alcohol and other drug abuse.
Yeah. Well, part of it is one's legal and the other one's not.
Okay.
The other thing I didn't mention is at Maid House we also treat tobacco addiction. So we
okay.
run a smoke-free campus because we look at that as an addictive substance like any other.
That is excellent.
But I think, alcohol is legal. And tobacco is legal. And marijuana is legal in some places. So any substance or anything that becomes an addiction and starts changing your brain chemistry in your body and all sorts of components of this chronic disease is at issue. So legal or not legal, but I think what happens in people's minds is they can justify alcohol because it's legal. They can justify tobacco
Cigarettes because
it's legal. But at some point, it's hurting you.
So
it
drugs
can hurt you. It's not always going to.
Gotcha.
Excuse me.
So alcohol and drug abuse takes a toll on everybody connected to that whole family unit. Do you find that a lot of women and children who are going through your program, that they come from broken homes, broken environments? What does their home life look like prior?
I don't have any data with me on that, but anecdotally, I can say that it's all those configurations. It's broken homes. It's adults that came out of the foster care system. It's adults that came from intact nuclear families.
Okay.
It's women who grew up in a single-parent home. I mean, it's everything.
Do you get a lot of do you receive a lot of clients who come from the foster care community? I mean, just
So we only serve women who are 18 or older.
Right,
so it could be
in their history.
Children. Yes, we do. We do.
Wow. Okay. So let me ask you this: how serious do you think the drug problem is, the illicit drug problem is in America, and then also locally?
Well, I mean, nationally, I forget what the exact statistic is, but it's 21.8 million Americans are struggling with addiction.
Okay.
And what we think the best data we can get for Wisconsin, for Milwaukee, actually, is 18,000 women in Milwaukee who might have a substance abuse issue. So,
18,000 women in Milwaukee County or city? County. Okay.
I believe it's the city.
It's the city.
It's in Milwaukee. It's in the city of Milwaukee.
Okay,
yeah,
wow.
that's a lot.
And I guess me, a person not working in the community, I'm thinking that's a small number, And I guess it depends if we're talking about a county, city versus, but
yeah,
one person on drugs is one too many.
Sure.
Okay,
Sure.
So maybe I'm safe there if I say that.
But yeah, it is a disease that is nationwide, and I would say that it's a chronic health issue. It's a health issue.
How often do you see
Public health issue.
it is a public health issue? Yeah.
Yes.
How often do you see individuals who are addicted to drugs having some other mental health diagnosis or issues? Are they co-occurring, or are they just...
That's the most common. It's what we were talking about before with the trauma. In that trauma is, people are more familiar with what's called PTSD, right? Post-traumatic stress disorder. We
Correct.
learned about that from our veterans coming back. Well, that's those same symptoms, that same diagnosis is the diagnosis for many women and men people who have experienced trauma. Many times, too, the other mental health diagnoses are common with substance abuse because you have not gotten the proper treatment, the proper diagnosis, the proper medication, so you're self-medicating. You're depressed, you feel terrible, you start using some substance. You've got schizophrenia, you're hearing voices, you're seeing things, and you find out using drugs or alcohol takes care of those symptoms. So that's often the case, that we haven't treated the core, the root, mental health.
Okay.
And so substance abuse is treating that.
And we're going to come back talking about the impact of drugs and alcohol on children and family members of addicts. And we're going to have a giveaway for the Black Child Development Institute. We're going to give away a free membership today later in the program. If you'd like to join this conversation, you can do so by calling 414-444-5250, or you can tweet us at FreshStart860. You can email us at freshstart860@gmail.com, or you can Facebook us at FreshStart860. We are back. This is Fresh Start Today. I'm your host, Jermaine Reed. I have in the studio with me Dr. Ramel Smith, and local psychologist. We have Christine Alstrup from the Maida House, and Erica B., who is a graduate of the program. How you doing, Erica?
I'm good. How are you?
We're waiting to hear from Erica. She, we want to say congratulations to her for your success in completing the program at Maida House. Right before break, we're talking about the impact of drugs and alcohol on children and family members. I said addicts before, but I was corrected off the air. Christine, what do you have to say?
What I had to say is I would like us not to call the people who are struggling with addiction addicts, and to talk about the fact that they have a chronic disease, and it's a chronic disease that is not curable.
Okay.
It's treatable, but it's not curable, and we don't want to have people identify themselves by their disease.
By their disease, okay.
So one might say, I'm addicted to alcohol, and then as they start to get better and get into recovery, then we talk about the recovery and the strength that goes with that.
A strength-based.
Yeah, as we talk about positive psychology, we talk about the power of words. There's life and death in the power of the tongue. So how you identify, how you label somebody is how they see themselves. We talk about self-fulfilling prophecies. As you hear yourself called something, you tend to identify with it and then act upon those things. So when we hear addict, that always has those negative connotations. Now, if somebody has flipped that term and made it to be something positive, for them to say, I was once an addict, I'm always going to be an addict, but I'm going to guard against falling back into this disease, that's good. But for some people who may hear it, it may tend to have them to cause a relapse, almost to say, you know what, you're right, I am an addict. We think of kind of pop psychology or pop culture that brings us into it. It's a great movie by Denzel Washington called Flight, and we see a person who struggled with abuse, and even though this person was fighting against it, everything inside of their mind, any small thing can trigger a relapse. So what we want to do is to encourage them around positivity, not to deny the realistic reality of what's going on, but to always look on that optimistic side of what can be.
And the reason I think why I had borrowed the term addict was that, Erica, yes?
Yeah, no, I was just going to add that Bill W., which is one of the founding members of Alcoholics Anonymous, referred to addiction as an obsession of the mind and an allergy of the body. It helps me in my recovery to think of it that way. While I have almost 4 years clean, I know that doesn't mean that I can go back, because my body is allergic to drugs and alcohol. There's no way I can use successfully. There's no way I can do this without having that reaction that sends me into a spiral downward. That's what helps me, is thinking of it in that way, is that right now, although my mind is not obsessing, that allergen is not in my body anymore. Once that allergen goes into my body, like I think of it the same way as a person with a nut allergy, they're fine walking around the street 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You give that person a peanut, they have to go to the hospital. They're near death. That's how I look at it. That's what helps me understand that this is not something that I'm cured from.
Okay.
This is not something that I always will struggle with necessarily day to day, but I have to keep it in the back of my mind so that I don't get too cocky and confident in my recovery, thinking, I've got this, now I can do this successfully.
There's a lot of people who don't understand addiction, and I'm one of those persons, but yet we've been exposed to folk, family members, and friends who are affected by their drug use and abuse. So for a person who has never used drugs, never been addicted to a drug, for us, when we hear, the War on Drugs campaign from the 80s, Nancy Reagan's slogan you mentioned earlier, just say no, and I'm assuming it's not that easy to say no, but I was borrowing that term addict from hearing really close associates, people who said, once an addict, always an addict. But having a positive twist, there's a new trending now. It's I used to use drugs, and I'm now in a lifelong recovery process. Is that what it is?
I think it was brought up again that it's just going to depend who you talk to. You know, I'm the first one because my life is an open book now. I'm an
Mm-hmm.
addict. That doesn't offend me
Okay.
to hear somebody refer to me as that. I think there's a stigma with addiction, and I think that's why shows like this, any forum that talks about addiction and tries to heal that stigma, and that hurt behind that word, it's a positive thing. If you would refer to me as an addict, I'm not going to take offense to it. You refer to the next person as an addict, they may. So I
Right,
think that's just what we're talking about now, is that it's just going to depend on who you talk to. Where if you're at a closed meeting for Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous, and you refer to yourself or your peers as addicts, that might be okay. You talk to somebody on the street and they reveal to you that they're also struggling with addiction, like, oh, you're an addict too, they might take offense to it. It's kind of a catch-22 in a sense.
Okay, so now, in terms of positive affirmation and changing a paradigm shift here and changing our talk, you said that the death and life's in the power of the tongue. As a man thinketh in heart, so is he. But how can we continue to say, or can a person continue to say that I'm an addict, I'll never be cured from this, if they're being optimistic? It just seems to me, if I were to go sit at a Tony Robbins motivational speech, I can conquer this thing. What is it about drug addiction, about drugs, that people can't get over?
Well, I don't think it's just drugs. When you're talking about an addiction, that means it's an insatiable appetite. You can't get enough of it. So if some people say, I can't relate to drugs, well, some people can relate to it from their poor eating habits, from gambling, from sex, any of those type of things. So when addiction is something that has you caught up, what the thing is in our society, some things have greater ramifications from a law standpoint, and then also just from a moral stigma standpoint. So when we start talking about how can't I understand it, well, what we have to do then is be honest with ourselves and look within our own weaknesses and see those things that we are addicted to, those things that can take a hold of us if we're not careful, because everybody has some spot for that. Eric, I really appreciate your honesty with that, because my dad was an addict, or whatever we want to say. He suffered from alcohol abuse forever, and so that scared the mess out of me with alcohol. So when you talk about what the Maida House can do as far as education and whatnot like that, I think that's one of the big things. So when you hear a child hear what you have to say and things of that nature, it lets them know I don't have to be afraid of this, but I have to be careful of it. And I think that's what we have to get back in mind with addiction, that this is something that could get me if I don't stay on top of it.
Well, see, and I appreciate your disclosure, because my mother was a graduate of the Maida House. And so I have a personal love and affinity for the work that you all do, because I've been on the other side as a child who has, dealt with these emotions and these feelings. But the question that I have, and maybe this is for Erica, do you think that some individuals who are using drugs, when you start talking about this obsession and you talk about these urges, is that urge and that obsession greater than the love that those parents have for their children? And the reason why I ask that is particularly for those children who come into the system as a result of something related to drug abuse or alcohol.
Okay, so I can't answer that for anybody else but myself. I can tell you, for me, in my active addiction, first of all, I didn't think that it was hurting or affecting anybody else. I wasn't being physically violent with people. So it's one of those, I'm just hurting me. Who does it hurt? It's fun for me. I'm just, this is just about me. I wasn't necessarily aware of the impact it was having on my family. The flip side to that is, once I was deep enough into my addiction, I was aware that my parents and my family were telling me, you're hurting us. Watching you go through this hurts us. At that point, I didn't care about myself, so it didn't matter what I was making them feel. And that's the honest to God truth, and it hurts me to say it to this day. I had very little care for myself in the deepest parts of my addiction.
So, let me say this, because I was going to say, words and actions sometimes don't meet. So sometimes if you ask a parent that question, you say, of course I love my child more than any of this. But what I would always ask when I did domestic violence, AODA classes, say, who do you spend more money with? who do you spend more time with? And when you start to ask these questions, your actions speak louder than words. So sometimes when you can't see it to yourselves from a theoretical standpoint, you have to sometimes be put it just brash out in your face. And when you start to see where your time, your talent, and all of those things go to, it becomes an obvious answer for you. And that's sometimes the thing that breaks that denial barrier, I
But
found.
remember, I have to say, it's a brain disease.
Yes.
It's a chronic disease. So when the compulsion and the obsession starts,
Yeah.
at some point your brain changes and you have
Right.
no control. And so
Wow.
these moms
The
love their children.
Right.
Okay.
They love their children. The disease takes them a different direction.
if-
there is brain scans that can show you. There's science
Okay.
that shows you this. This is not.
Well, if that is true,
Yes.
and there's an addiction, and there's x-rays and medical procedures that is confirming that the brain biologically and structure is being changed as a result of this addiction, why are so many women being penalized for not being able to get their children back when they are pretty much arrested by an addiction if it's a disease? So are
I
there some
agree.
communities?
That's the
We
question.
criminalize
Yeah.
illness in this,
Wow.
this
Right.
community,
Isn't
in
that
this
what we have
country.
to talk about?
Yeah, and I think that's the bigger issue.
Right. So we're if we have treatment, if we have treatment on demand, if we have good treatment, and people have identified the disease with this woman whose children now need to go to foster care or go to a relative for their own safety, understandable, then let's get her into treatment. We have many women who get reunified with their children at Maida House. I think we had 36 last year
Oh,
where
wow.
children are
Great,
placed
great,
back
great.
with their parents because they've gotten better, because they're in recovery, because they're treating their they're treating their addiction. The disease is being arrested.
Let me ask you this. If there was some advice that you possibly could give to the child welfare community, those individuals who are working with children and families who are impacted by drug addiction and abuse. Now, there's a thing called the Adoption Family Safe Act. And basically what that is a federal law that came into existence under Bill Clinton's administration. And the AFSA, the ASFA is what they call it, basically is a clock that
Yes.
says, okay, if your child is in care for 15 consecutive months out of 22, now there's some exceptions, but basically the rule is 15 out of 22 months, then the state or whoever has custody, physical custody of their child, can petition the courts to terminate a parent's parental rights. A large percentage of the parents whose children are in care have this disease. It's not recreational drug use, it's a disease. And so when we have to deal with the legal aspects of this, what advice would you give to the judicial community, to the child welfare community, in terms of what is that we need to understand about drug addiction?
Well, here's the thing. There is some good work going on with that, and I think we should give credit to the bureau, the state, and
Sure.
and to there's Family Drug Treatment Court. I mean, the systems are starting to look at this. Not that they more seriously. I think they have in the past as well. That we need early identification. So if you're identifying early and you're using the techniques that are out there besides force to get people into treatment, so identify it, motivate them, show them why treatment's good, have these good treatment programs, you can sometimes fight that clock.
Okay.
Because we have
You can beat the clock.
you can beat the clock. There you
Okay,
go.
so what's the tip again for all these mothers that are listening right now and they're concerned? I have this disease. Nobody really understands what I'm going through. I really do love
Sometimes
my
they
kids,
don't.
but I have this biological and brain neurological.
Get help.
Get help.
Ask for help.
Ask for help.
for
Well,
help.
let's ask Erica, because I'd be very curious. What made you, what introduced you to the Maida House?
The Department of Probation and Parole, simply.
Okay.
No, I had heard about the Maida House.
I like you,
that's
girl.
where I
I
want
like
to get
you.
this on.
I like
I
you.
I have to keep it real because once you start mincing words, you start lying to yourself.
Yeah.
That's just me. So, yes, I was on probation. I had relapsed, and my probation officer suggested Maida House because I was pregnant at the time. I took that opportunity. I had been through another treatment center. We had talked about before how sometimes the whole person isn't treated. Sometimes it's just the addiction that was treated. That was my
Gotcha.
experience at the last treatment facility. Just treating the addiction. I had heard good things about Maida House, so I decided to give it a shot. And I thank God every day that I do. I mean, that I did give it a shot, because I don't believe where I was headed at the time I would be here today. I don't believe my son would have been born healthy and free from drugs and alcohol. I don't think that he would be the happy 3-year-old that he is now if it wasn't for Made a House, not only letting me in there, but also putting me in touch with a doctor that was willing to advocate for me during my pregnancy, that as long as I tested clean and my baby tested clean, there should be no bureau involvement. She's done what she needs to do up until this point. Her child is clean, she's clean. Made a House recommended that doctor to me. Made a House recommended, okay, this hospital has a little bit of a stigma with patients that come from Made a House, whereas this hospital is more open-minded, and so many things that I could go on and on that I have today wouldn't be possible without them.
That's great. We have a caller on the line, so we're going to take our call, and then we're going to go into a break. Hi, good afternoon, caller.
Yes, how you doing? I heard the addicts talking, and heard a lot of good things. As a matter of fact, I used to run a program that was pretty powerful. We had gotten ladies from the Maida House, and the Maida House has been doing some great things for quite a while now. You know, I'm just glad to see that there are, still in motion, to help. You had stated about Bill Clinton and his movement to for children that were in
foster care.
Yeah, in foster care. And I think that when you really look at Bill Clinton and his record, he did a lot of things that really wasn't that cool, And with the addict thing, I'm a recovering addict, I came to believe in a power greater than myself to restore me back to sanity. And a person really don't have a problem with addiction until they say, hey, I want to stop. Then all chaos breaks loose in their life. For instance, this is an incurable disease, and Bill Clinton, at that point in time when he got in office, he was able to fill that deficit with removing the addicts from SSI and Social Security, because that was, it was deemed an incurable disease, and addicts were, I don't know if you want to say they were being rewarded, but they were non-functioning people that needed that source of income. Well, Bill Clinton, once getting in office, chopped that away right away. So we had addicts out there with no insurance because that was taken away. And, a lot of people now, young mothers, are born addicted. They're born addicted. They couldn't wait to get their first bump or get in the room and smell the smoke. And they don't know why they were dramatically moved to this substance. But
What I'm going to have to do is we're going to have to wrap this comment up because I have some other calls coming in. But I appreciate you calling. And just one quick question. I just want to get clarification. Do you believe that once you use drugs that you'll always be addicted, or you think that there is a recovery?
Well, if you look at the NA book on page 94, 95, it says that we do recover. Okay, now you can take that literally, that you do recover, or you can, take this spiritual, after having a spiritual awakening, and believe that God has delivered you from that substance, and that's something you no longer have to deal with.
All right. Thanks a lot, my friend. Call back.
All right.
So we're gonna take a break, but and when I come back, I want you to expand, Eric, on something you said earlier. You're talking about you weren't deep enough into your addiction, so automatically something went up in my head, and it made me ask the question: are there different levels to addiction? So, I mean, do you just jump right in, or you graduate from one to the next, to what that process looks like? So we'll talk about that when we come back from break. Thanks, guys. You're listening to Fresh Start Today. If you'd like to join this conversation, you can call 414-444-5250. You're listening to Fresh Start Today. I'm your host, Jermaine, and we're talking about the impact of alcohol and other drug abuse on children and families of individuals who are using drugs. Am I correct?
Correct.
All right. I just want to make sure I had the right words. And so, listen, if you want to join this conversation, you can call 414-444-5250. And one of my guests today is Christine Ostrup. She's from the Maida House. And Christine, if someone wanted to call your office or...
Sure. Anybody who's looking for help, please just give us a call at 962 1200, 962-1200, or we're at maidahouse.org. And we'd be happy to direct you into our services or show you the way to what is needed.
Excellent. Now, Erica, before break, I had posed a question regarding, in response to something you said earlier, where you said that you weren't deep enough into your drug. So, question came in my mind. Are there different levels to drug addiction? Does a person know when they are actually hooked or they've hit rock bottom? Does that vary from person to person? Can you answer that?
For me, I think it varies from person to person. For me, I don't think at the time that there was so much of a consciousness that this is worse than it was maybe last month or last year. I do know that I can actually remember when I realized that I was addicted, and I was with the person that I started using with. He had been doing it for a while. I hadn't. I thought I had the flu in the middle of the summer, and he was like, "No, you're dope sick." And I was like, "What?" But I'm just having fun. This is just something that I'm doing recreationally. This is just to kick back and relax. No, I was definitely addicted. Looking back on my addiction, I can see where I went from. I kept reaching my next, I never did this yet, and then I reach it.
Okay.
I think looking back on it, there was definitely kind of a spiraling down. And as far as hitting rock bottom, I think a lot of the times I thought I was at rock bottom, but it wasn't. Because I remember for at least a year thinking, okay, tomorrow I'm not going to use. Tomorrow, this is it. This is the last time. Tomorrow I'm not going to use. I get up and do it all over again.
Because you had a disease.
Exactly. Because it was really high. It was really high. It was really easy to think that when I was high. But then when I started coming down and that obsession of the mind kicked in, and then you add in those physical withdrawal symptoms, it was really hard to wake up in the morning and be like, yeah, I'm going to stick to it because I feel great about being sober now. So for me, I think when I was in it, I didn't notice it. Now that I've done work with Maida House, with recovery on my own, I've been made aware of the different levels that I've reached.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think too, there's people think that people have to hit bottom to get treatment, and that's not true. I mean, we would like people to seek treatment before you hit bottom. There's no reason why you have to hit bottom, but you have to recognize the symptoms of the disease.
And what are the symptoms of the disease?
Compulsion is one.
Okay.
So you can't stop. It's anything, you always think about it. You keep using even once there's dire consequences. So now your children, let's say, have gone into the foster care system. You would think you're going to stop, but you don't, because you have this disease. So even with dire circumstances, you continue to use. You use in circumstances where you shouldn't be using. You get up in the morning and you say, I'm not going to use today, and you can't stop. This is drugs, this is alcohol, this is tobacco, this is everything.
Is that different from the addiction severity or symptoms related to eating sugar?
Sugar lights up the same place in your brain as crack cocaine.
Are you serious? So you telling me that sugar
and cocaine actually, when you derive it from its natural plant, come from the same place though. So it's not too far to think about. And even if you just go back 100 years ago, cocaine was one of those psychotropic medications that was given out. Cocaine was a legal drug at the time. So then they started to understand the devastating effects that it can have from an addictive nature and things of that nature, and you go back.
Well, I think I'm an addict. I just learned on the program today I'm an addict. You telling me that sugar and cocaine come from the same plant?
At its very core. But and what we see in the brain scans is that pleasure place in your brain when you ingest sugar is the same as when you ingest crack cocaine.
Lights up the dopamine levels.
Right, exactly.
So there's so many different types of drugs that people use. It's not just illicit drugs, but what are some of the other drugs?
Well, America's in the midst of a prescription drug epidemic. And so many of the women that we're seeing now in treatment, and I've been working at Maida House for 20 years, and so I've been through, crack cocaine was the thing. We were worried about methamphetamines. It's always been alcohol, marijuana. We have more and more women seeking treatment now just for marijuana. Is their drug of abuse. And I think that's surprising to a lot of people that people are seeking treatment for that. But, marijuana's changed. Marijuana is a lot more potent. It's a lot more addictive than it was. And once again, it's those degrees that people are using this. There's a heroin epidemic in this city, in this county, in this state, across this nation. And what we're learning about people and their heroin addiction is they don't start on heroin. They work up to it, right?
So is that the graduation?
Well, and it's interesting the way it starts. It really starts, somebody mentioned Brett Favre on the break, so we all know Brett Favre, right? It was very public at some point about his addiction to Vicodin, right? They gave him Vicodin because he hurt his shoulder or something.
It was a pain reliever.
It was a pain reliever. And at some point, he became addicted to it. Well, that happens to other people, too. They have an injury and they get on a pain reliever and they become addicted to it, but they might not have the money or the resources to continue to get the pills, and heroin is very cheap. Heroin is an opiate, Vicodin's an opiate, oxycodone's an opiate.
But mental health issues with depression, and so when you talk about a disease of the brain, you talk about pain in the brain, and so some people are given medications, psychotropic medications to eliminate or alleviate some of that pain or to manage that pain. So
that's
it's different.
And some of those drugs have the same properties actually, but the difference is obviously what the FDA was supposed to do was you're supposed to make sure that this was the safest quality, and it was also measured in the amount that you got. Think about a person who's in a hospital and they have a certain amount of morphine they can get. It's only so much you can get for a certain time period because so you won't abuse it. They try to do it to monitor it. When you take away some of those monitoring devices, you take it into the underground, into an illicit field. Now you have a person who has a medication that's not regulated, who's using it and abusing it. And I look at it sort of like an aspirin. If you have a headache, you take 2, it'll probably help you. But if you take 200, it's going to kill you. And it's the same thing with that. So that's why I'm not a big fan of the prescription medications because of the component that it has to become used to be turned itself into an illicit medication.
And the opiates do something different to the brain than an antidepressant does, than an SSRI.
And there's different classes.
Yeah, it's a completely different.
But when you talk about like antipsychotics and things of that nature,
those
then
are
you're
starting
getting
to abuse too. Yes. Yeah.
So now, of the women who are served at the Maida House, 90% of them are mothers, according to your 2013 data. 54% of them have children who are involved in the child welfare community, and 80% of the children involved in child welfare are known to have one or more parents who have a drug use or abuse situation.
Yes.
Those numbers are really high. So it's really great to know that you all are doing some great work over there. I want to kind of shift things to talk about the family and talk about Erica as a mother, as a parent, and your children or your child, and this whole approach to include family members, because I can recall when there was drug abuse going on and use going on in my home environment, the shame and the guilt and just a number of feelings and emotions that members of family members who are using drugs have to live with. And we get tired of them being on drugs. So how was that process for you and your family?
We're still going through it.
Okay.
As far as treatment was, my family is out of state, so it wasn't necessarily easy for them to get involved for the different programs that Maida House offers. My son's father was part of my support team. It really breaks down to the way, for me, family wasn't necessarily mom, dad, brothers. It was, it was the family that was supporting me and holding me and lifting me up at that time. They allowed my son's father to come in and spend time with me and our son every day for 2 hours a day to get him involved, because they want to encourage any father, of course, that's willing to take part in their kid's life to do that. As far as with my family that was out of state, there was some healing that had to be done on my part and on their part. As anybody can imagine, I did some horribly hurtful things to them, even sometimes just by the way I was living my life, hurting them to see their daughter go through this. We're still in that process, I can't tell you that I've earned everything back. I think that we're still in it, and the background that Maida House gave me, the tools that they gave me, helps that a lot. I think that I was able to heal on my own without seeking an apology from them. Because imagine being so hurt by somebody, and then that person that hurt you comes to you and says, I need an apology. You know, I had to learn from Maida House that I might not be able to do that. It might be something that we could talk about over time. I think what's hard with kids is that, like you were talking about the shame and the guilt that you fear, kids can't always label those emotions.
Right.
So if you can't label them, how do you know how to deal with them? And Maida House, one of their groups there is called filial therapy. It's play therapy.
Okay.
It's teaching mothers how to let their children direct the play. Somebody as young as my son, who's 3 now, at the time he wasn't able to do play therapy, but now I'm learning to watch the way that he plays and let him direct it and you can learn so much from that, and those emotions do come out. What they've seen, even just in passing, does come out, and Maida House teaches mothers how to do that, and that's extremely healing for the child.
Okay. For children, is there a direct link or strong link between alcohol and other drug abuse and use and domestic violence? And when I talk about domestic violence, I'm talking about from parent to child.
Well, when somebody's under the influence of substances, they're not thinking correctly.
Mm-hmm.
So could they do something to hurt another person? I assume it does happen. It has happened. So, yeah.
Do you see a lot of that? You know, because there's abuse part, then there's the neglect part.
Yeah,
And I'm going to talk about.
If I had to, we don't necessarily collect that data, but there is neglect more than abuse.
More than abuse?
Yeah, I mean, it's not being able to get them, the mother in this case, usually being able to do what they need to do to make sure the child gets fed and clothed and all those things. But it's not usually abuse. I mean, once again, they love their children, and I know love sometimes is in abusive relationships, but they really do love their children, and it doesn't always come out as violent and physical, but there's neglect.
I've seen it both ways. Working at Children's Hospital in the past, I worked in the
Sure.
trauma department, and the majority of our children that came to us, because when you talk about removing a child, the first thing is something that can be proven from the child borough welfare system. And sometimes emotional abuse can't be seen as quickly.
Right.
Some
Right.
form of neglect, where this mom or this dad was not
Right.
here for a
Right.
certain amount of period of time, or they came to school disheveled or something like that. But the majority of the times, it involves some type of marks left up on the child, and it came because of the inhibitions on the parent or the caregiver at that time. And it did leave a physical abuse mark on the child. And when you talk to the parent, it's something that was very regretful, very hurtful, something that was not intended to do. But when you're under the influence of a substance,
Sure.
you're, like you said, you're not yourself. You will do things in a capacity in which you don't understand. We even see that if you take it from concussion studies now with a lot of the players in the NFL, when they turn into seemingly a different person because the brain chemistry has
Right.
changed because of what's happened. And then sometimes these things happen, and then we exacerbate it by self-medicating, and then that makes the problem worse. But going back to the problem, anything is possible once you're under the
Right.
influence, because whether you love your child or protect them or not, like we said, you're not really yourself and acting in a manner in which you would normally conduct yourself. You're outside of your own character.
So for those individuals who are under the influence and abuse or neglect their children while under the influence, do we hold them responsible for that? If they become
Yes.
another person,
Yes, you
okay.
hold them responsible, and you get them treatment.
And you get them treatment.
And you get
It's
them
not,
treatment.
It's not punishment
Yeah.
always
Yeah.
is the
Okay.
answer. You
Yeah.
get them help that
Right.
they
Help.
need.
Right.
Okay. Now, 80%, going back to that, 80%, approximately 80% of the children who are in the Milwaukee Child Welfare's community, child welfare community, have a parent who is on drugs, one or two parents who are on drugs, or some substance abuse. These children come in to care, often have siblings. And what we will see is that these children have some very adult behaviors, where they assume the parenting role.
Sure.
And some people refer to, and I don't know if this is an official word or not, but parentified.
Sure.
So, do you think that is connected to possibly the neglect that's associated with?
Yes, sure, definitely. We see that same thing. So, if mom is unable to get up or unable to care for their child, that, then the older siblings take over. They've seen what needs to be happening, they love their kids, and they take over.
And so these children that we're caring for until their parents are back and that family unit is back to a healthy place, it's important for foster parents, I think, to understand that they can go to Walmart and to a grocery store and steal because they're trying to survive. You know, when they were back at home, you know, if mom didn't get up, if mom didn't come home, you know, there's no food in the refrigerator, and I have 2 younger siblings, you know, we have to eat, and they kick into survival mode.
One of the biggest things we had were foster parents would get upset because the child would hoard food.
Hoard food.
And they would say, hey, you know, I don't know where this next meal is coming from. They say, listen, it's here. The refrigerator's here. But it's like you said, it's an instinctive nature for survival.
Sure, and so the kids need treatment, right? They
The
need
kids need
their
treatment
and
too.
they need
And
help,
that
and they
is
need to
connection.
feel
Not be
safe.
punished.
Yeah.
And so when we start talking about the impact that alcohol and other drug abuse have on family members, and particularly children, now we have a situation where somebody else in the family is going through therapy
Oh,
or receiving
absolutely.
services because of the addiction or drug use or what have you of the parent. So, you know, that's you know,
Yeah, it affects the whole family. So when you have an addiction in the family, it's going to affect the whole family, and everybody needs help. The same thing can be said about any chronic illness that's happening in a family.
Yes.
If you have somebody in the family going through cancer, it affects the whole family. It affects how they see the world, how they act in the world, and what they do. And everybody needs help, and everybody needs to heal.
But the only one thing about that is most of the time, if we have like a genetic disease, you'll get sympathy from people.
Yes,
You know,
yes.
but in this time, we don't get the sympathy. We get just the opposite.
Although it is partially genetic.
Yeah.
well, you know what we're going to do? We're going to take a break. It has been great having the Maida House here talking about the impact of drug abuse on children and families of individuals who have used or who are using substances. So we thank you, Christine Ostrup. And can you please give the number again for the Maida House?
962-1200, 962-1200, or maidahouse.org.
All right. And Erica, it's great having you here today. Thank you for sharing your story. And I mean, you're just an amazing person, great courage. And we just wish you well on your journey, you and your family. And feel free to come back and talk about things that we need to know to help educate us about
Anytime,
addiction.
reach out. I love giving back.
All right. And I just want to give a shout out to Rick. He's a great engineer here, and Sean and Floyd and all the great people over there at Fresh Start, and Dr. Ramel Smith, who make this talk show possible, engaging, and I look forward to every week. It's like therapy for me. So we're going to take a break, and after the break, caller number 10, if you would like to call in, you can win a free membership to the Black Child Development Institute, a 1-year membership to the Black Child Development Institute to caller number 10. We are back on air. This is Jermaine. I'm your host for Fresh Start today, and I have a very special friend that's in the studio with me today, Dr. Ramel Smith, and he's no stranger to this forum. And we're going to be talking about the black male child and the prevalence of ADHD and misdiagnosing, that whole thing that goes along with that. But we have caller number 10. We actually have 10 people that's listened to the program today. I feel so good. Hello, caller. How are you doing?
I am wonderful, Mr. Reed.
Who is this?
Alana.
Oh, God. Okay. You don't qualify for this.
Yes, I do.
Okay, well, listen, what we're going to do is get your information, and we will be giving you a membership for 1 year to the Black Child Development Institute. Don't know if you knew about the banquet they're having tomorrow night for Community Service Awards, but if not, maybe there's time for you to get a ticket or come as a guest of Fresh Start. I don't know. But if not, I will pay your way. So let me know. Thanks you for tuning in, Miss Alana, and we'll get your information.
Thank you. I'm enjoying the show.
All right. So, we're talking about the black male child. Last week we had the iconic Dr. Jawanza Kunjufu. He has authored over 37 books, and I have some great news. Dr. Jawanza Kunjufu will be coming to Fresh Start on December the 16th, and we're going to be talking about the Black Male Child series. And so we're going to have a 2-3-part series, and we're going to be talking about a number of things as it relates to parenting and working with African-American boys who are in a state of emergency. Now, Dr. Smith, you have worked with a lot of males, and a lot of African-American males, you know, in your profession, I assume, but also probably just every day that you're working with boys. And the thing about it is that you and I both once were African-American boys. So Dr. Jawanza Kunjufu will be coming, and he's written the classic four-part series, countering the conspiracy to destroy African American boys. Last week we talked about the prevalence of African American boys who are in special education and how they enter special education. And so we're going to kind of build on that conversation, and we're going to talk about ADHD because a large number of those individuals who are in special education, regardless to their racial or ethnic composition, are diagnosed with ADHD. So I think the first thing we want to kind of talk about, what is ADHD?
Okay, well, that's kind of a trick question.
Is it a trick question?
Why is it a trick question? Because
Okay.
in psychology, there's a book called the DSM-5, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Health Disorders. And so this is supposed to be the book where if there is an issue of mental illness disorder that you go into, say what it is. However, this book is changed about every 10 years, whatever it may be. ADHD changed from just last year to when the new DSM-5 came out, May 2013, it changed just a little bit. So you say, well, how can something consistently be a disease if it's something that's changing? So that already lets you know there's some things that's arbitrary to it. But what it's supposed to do, when you think of ADHD, is three components that most people usually put to it. It's a state of inattentiveness, a state of impulsivity, and a state of hyperactivity. Now, before, you could have just ADD, which was attention deficit disorder, or you could have ADHD, which was the hyperactivity component inside of it, or you could have the combined type where you had all three mixed together. Now, what they've done with the new definition of it is to say that you have all three, so it's ADHD. However, now they have it in mild, moderate, and severe levels in which you do. So when you're looking at it, you're looking at a person who has the inability to attend to certain things, specifically when you look at smaller kids, person who can sit down, who can regulate, who can maintain things of that nature, a person who's hyperactive, who's very impulsive, does things without thinking of the consequences or repercussions, things of that nature. So when we think about ADHD, it's an attention deficit order where the person is just prone to impulsivity and acts of hyperactivity that's usually stronger than what we would consider normal.
And that's different than ADD, attention deficit disorder.
Well, in the past it has, but now it's just ADHD, and now we have the different levels of mild, moderate, and severe.
Okay, I think we have a caller on the line. Do we have a caller? Okay, he hung up. Okay, so we learned what ADHD is. Now, in terms of the diagnosis, percentage of children who are diagnosed with ADHD, I think I read something like 4.6 million nationwide, 4.6 million.
And it's actually higher than that now. According to the CDC, even from the 2011 statistics, it's up to over 10 million. So
Really?
So now when we look at that, it's a caveat. I'm always careful with numbers because you say, really, does this many children have this disorder? I think really in actuality, you can label every kid with specifically every boy because of the way we're raised and things of that nature with this in this pure sense. And you say, well, what do you mean everybody? Because I don't really think it's the biggest issue is what people say. ADHD is an issue of what they're saying now of the EF. That's the executive function. Inside our brains, we have something called our frontal lobe that's supposed to control our executive function. That our problem solving, the ability to make, if you're going to make a mistake, how can you in your mind self-talk to yourself? How can you let yourself know that something is going wrong? How can you prevent it? How can you regulate? How can you attend to things that most people can't? Well, if you look at most kids can't do that, and that's why we call them kids. They need to have space, time to roam, and to run. Now, the problem with this is even in adults, the executive functioning in our brains do not stop until you're 25. So although people are considered adults at the age of 18, from neuropsychology, we learn that the brain, specifically the executive function area that helps with these problem-solving material, does not fully develop until you're 25. So a lot of times you'll see a kid who's diagnosed as ADHD, and then people say, well, what happened before? I thought he was diagnosed. Well, what happened was that person began to mature, and as the person began to mature and the brain began to understand things better, they began to act better, and then those same symptoms that was once considered ADHD began to dissipate.
Okay, so in terms of diagnosing ADHD, what are some of the classic tools or instruments that are used to diagnose?
Well, that's just the thing. There is really no real tool in which they have this universal. What they will look at is, again, like that DSM-5, and what they'll do and say, these are some of the things if your child is experiencing a certain amount of disorders in the class, and they must experience these disorders before a certain age. Before it used to be 7, now they've upped it to age 12. And you have to have so many areas in inattention and hyperactivity and impulsivity. They'll give you a list of 15. So let's say for the inattention piece, can this person attend in class? Do they raise their hands without asking a question? Will they talk without being called upon? All of these things. And if they will meet 6 of them for a sustained period, usually in a 6-month interval where it causes heavy interaction with them learning, then it becomes a problem. But not only that, it must happen in 2 or 3 domains. So with children, we usually look at home, school, and the community. Because if it's only happening in one place, we say, well, maybe it's something specific to that place. But if it's happening in at least 2 of the 3 main areas where they're at, then you begin to think that there's a problem. And what most people do is an eye test in which you look at it. You say, is this person having issues with it? But from what they're doing now, specifically, they're trying to make it a neurological issue.
Okay.
And now why that's important is this. When it becomes a neurological issue, now it's truly a disease. If my child has diabetes and has been diagnosed with diabetes and I don't give them insulin, what happens? Now I'm called for neglect. I'm called for a form of abuse.
Okay.
If my child is diagnosed with ADHD, which is a neurological disorder, and I do not treat with the medication, because before it wasn't, so a parent had the option to say, I do not want to treat with medication. I will use alternative interventions. Now, as it is a neurological disorder, if it is not treated with medication, it becomes a point of neglect on the parent.
I want to be clear. So has it reached a point where it's now defined or categorized, classified as being a neurological disorder?
Yes, with the DSM-5, according from May 2013, with this coming out, it's all considered to be an executive functioning issue.
Well, let's talk about that, because you just mentioned that if a child has been evaluated and it's been determined that they have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and the recommendation is from that mental health specialist or psychologist, psychiatrist, that this child needs to take Ritalin, Adderall.
Usually put them on a stimulant, a methylphenidate, which could be a Ritalin, it could be an Adderall, depending what's helpful for the child. Now, what they'll do, you said before, is there a tool? Well, there's different tools that they use, but really what they are questionnaires where they'll ask a teacher, they'll ask a parent, and then based on those questionnaires, they'll say where your child rates. But those things you have to take with a grain of salt, because we talked about this last week, if we have a white female teacher, and a black male student, where we have a mismatch of learning styles and everything, how will that teacher rate this person? Or let's say we have a mother who doesn't even fill it out because she doesn't have time, or maybe she fills it out on a day that's bad where the guy is just acted up. These are the things that we use as the determinants to go.
And I want to get back to that whole neurological classification now in the DSM-5. But let me just answer that or add something to that piece you just said, that if the parent refuses to complete this form, because in foster care, I'm familiar with that form, so if I were to just take a stab at it, it would appear that that's not an option, that providers need to complete those forms. Otherwise, they could suffer some repercussions from not completing it.
But that's the whole thing. So let's say a form that they will use is something called the Connors. And so let's say they fill out this form, but I don't really know this child. Let's say I'm a teacher and this is my third week. And you're filling out a form on a child that's 3 weeks. Or let's say it's the middle of the school year, but your teacher had a nervous breakdown. There's a substitute teacher in for the last 2 weeks, but they need that form completed. They say, well, get a teacher who knows this child kind of the best then based on those things. It's no pure science, no pure exact science to it. And that's where the problem comes for me. If it's truly a neurological issue, it should be something as clear as cholesterol, where you can take my blood, get my blood levels, and say, hey, listen, it's over this threshold right here. This is where we know the danger material. There's nothing like that for ADHD.
This parent who child has been diagnosed with ADHD, and the recommendations are for medication therapy or treatment, and the parent refuses. And so there could be a charge of medical neglect. So when we look at that, I know for African Americans that we take issue with psychological evaluation tests or having our children tested. We also take issue with them being placed on stimulants.
Psychotropic medication.
Medication as well.
It's just different variants. You have antidepressants, antipsychotics, and stimulants, things of that nature.
So can a parent say, okay, for religious purposes, I'm not giving my child a medication? I mean, they can say it, but do you see that happen often? And now with the new DSM-4 classification, reclassifying things, how do you think that's going to impact parents' rights?
Well, it's very new, so a lot of things have not been enacted already. So things are kind of still under the old regime from the DSM-4, where it was more purely optional. But this is one of the ways in which we're looking. And one of the things what you never want to do is when you're fighting a war is not to look 5 years in ahead to see where the enemy is trying to take you, where you can see exactly how to prevent those things. So when we look at it here, what will be the exact reasons and excuses? I mean, you've seen on the news where a person said, we're not putting our child on this medication. We'll take them to the church. We'll hope that they'll be healed. The child dies. Then the parents are charged for neglect. So, I mean, is it going to get to that point? Well, this is a little bit different than that goes. But what happens is, as it relates to treatments that this person can get, that causes the problem right there, whether or not they would be eligible for any other type of services if they refuse to take this specific title with themselves. And that's always been the trouble when we talk about special education. It's not that we didn't want some of the other special services if they were going to be beneficial, but those services always came attached with a price. And unfortunately, not only do they come with a label, but oftentimes the services that we're going for aren't even helpful and beneficial in the end. So the parents like, what's the use? But then if you have a child who consistently had these issues and are identified by the teachers, by the staff in that school, then what happens is you get a parent who's sick of hearing that about their child, and then they move their child, and then you have a child who's in a transient position, unfortunately, going from school to school, and then that affects the learning, which affects the behavior, and then gets us into that cycle where then you probably more than likely are going to have a dropout person, or you have a parent who says, you know what, I give up. Forget it. I'm putting my kid on this specific medication. And what I found is with the medications, once a child is on it, either one of three things happen. They take it and they hate it and they regret it, and then they start to act out in different types of ways. Two, they don't take it. They sell it and they become a drug dealer in another way. Or three, I've seen people take it and then abuse it. And then that leads to where you used to talk about marijuana being the gateway drug. But then this becomes a gateway drug because once they say, I'm going to stop taking this medication, they found out that it did have some benefits to it. So they find a replacement for it, and that's usually some type of illicit narcotic.
Let me read something. In a recent study of medical records of nearly 850,000 children ages 5 to 11, African-American children are diagnosed with the hyperactivity disorder at much greater rates than other ethnic and racial groups. What do you think lends to that?
Well, I think part of it is what we talked about before. It's the mismatch in culture and understanding. Okay. And so when you have teachers, because most of the referrals come from the school system,
right.
Because that's what teacher you needed in 2 or 3 problems. Most of the time, a parent can say, I'll have a parent who say, they're having this problem in school. I don't have this at home.
Right.
You know, but it's because the environment in school is not conducive to their learning style. So once the teacher then identifies it, if the parent then goes ahead because of the problem in school, then you start to see a preponderance, just like we see the disproportionate number of African-American males in special education. Well, if you look at the number of males in special education compared to the number of males diagnosed with a mental health disorder, whether it be ADHD, ODD, or disorder. ODD is oppositional defiant disorder. Those type of negative behaviors that sometimes has nothing to do with any type of physical issues, but more so a cultural mismatch that the teacher can't understand what the child is not on the same page, and then labels their difference as a deficit, as we talked about last week.
So there's this mismatch or potential to mismatch, and that would lend to possibly, now that's just a referral piece of it. So when you deal with the diagnosis piece, you know, comes from
when we look at the referrals.
Okay,
let's be clear with it. Once you're referred, more than likely you're in.
Once you're referred, more likely you're in.
Yeah, because once a teacher has referred you, they're going to do something about it. Now, are some people denied some services? Yeah, but if a teacher is having trouble with you in a specific way, that's why they moved it from just having learning disabilities to having behavioral difficulties, EBD, the emotionally behavior disturbed class. That was for the kid who academically didn't test for special education. But what they said is their behavior was such a nuisance in the class that they had to be removed from behavioral problems. So for the referral, it's like this. I may refer you for one thing, but if you don't qualify for this, I have different other avenues to say, this is where I want to get you to, get you out of my class, not thinking of the negative ramifications for that person's life, but thinking about that immediate reward for the teacher.
So let me ask this then. So we're talking about mismatch. Do you think that in terms of the referral, the diagnosis, I read something that referenced that a lot of the children who are being assessed by a pediatrician versus a psychologist or a psychiatrist. Is there a difference?
Well, most pediatricians don't even want to do psychotropic medications, but the one psychotropic medication that they will do will be a stimulant. They don't want to deal with antidepressants. They don't want to deal with antipsychotics, things of that nature, because that goes a bit beyond their spectrum of comfortability. But what they will do if the parent is complaining about certain issues and then there's a collateral information from the school, the pediatrician will then break down and go through there. And this is one way that you don't have to deal with a psychiatrist. If you're as a parent and your child is required to have a stimulant, you can do everything through your pediatrician. So sometimes it comes as a default, not so much that the pediatrician is prescribing it, but that's the safety net for those who've endorsed it and a way to get that medication. Generally the stimulant.
So do you think it's better to have a child seen by a psychologist or psychiatrist, or it's okay to just go to a pediatrician?
Well, I think it's best to have the child seen by somebody who cares about them and who really loves them, and obviously who's knowledgeable and competent in their area. We assume if they're holding those degrees that they have that. But what I always tell parents is this: if you go into a place, and generally with a psychiatrist, you get a quick 15-minute, how you doing, how the medication going, okay, let's refill it. With a pediatrician, normally you've had that person since birth, you've had that person for some time, in best case scenarios where that person understands the child, knows the child, and can really look and evaluate and see what's going on, and you can monitor it. But what I say is you want whoever who is servicing your child to say, what are we doing? And also I tell my parents, let's not look at medication as the first option. Let's say somebody says your child has ADHD. Okay, one, you don't have to accept it. But two, what are the other alternative interventions that you can use?
Okay.
A lot of times, I'll take a person who's big in our day now, a swimmer by the name of Michael Phelps. He was diagnosed with ADHD. And so what his mom's pediatrician told him was, said, listen, you need to get this kid involved in something that he enjoys doing. And you know what she picked? She picked swimming. And because he had all of this crazy energy, now what was once considered a deficit became a positive for him under the water.
Wow.
So when you start to look at that, now as a parent, what you have to say is, okay, you say my child has this specific issue. And I'm not even big with labeling and whatnot, but if you need something for a name, say, okay, so what else can we do in addition to psychotropic medication? That is not the first remedy and should not be the first remedy. Therapy is always a different thing, because if it's truly an executive functioning issue, then that means there's something going on with our problem solving. So what we like to do is to do different interventions to teach them how to think, how to understand, learn from their mistakes, how to slow their world down so things are a little bit slower, so they're not reacting with this emotional brain that's a reflex, but reacting with their rational brain, meaning they're trying to see things in advance, can predict what can happen, choose what's the best result for them, and then act upon those choices. But that all comes with training the mind to think.
So these strategies, behavioral strategies, modification strategies, that's they're therapeutic, but they're not medicated.
Yes.
Medication related. What are some of the tips when you talk about teaching them how to slow their mind down? What is a simple tip, 2 tips that you can give to a parent who's listening to this program right now, whose son has been diagnosed with ADHD, or you suspect that the child may have ADHD? What are 2 strategies that probably they can use?
Well, the first thing, if somebody has been demonstrating the symptoms of ADHD, have been known to have ADHD, have been diagnosed with ADHD, then there's going to be some issues. So what I try to tell the parents is, what do you think is the core issues? You're talking about just not messing with the leaves, but getting to the core. What do you think is the big issue that's going on? So what I like to do is that we become scientific in what we do. Let's say this kid is having trouble in class with fighting. Well, what causes the fighting? What is the antecedent? That means what's that triggering behavior that usually starts that? Well, somebody said something about me. You think about a kid who, why'd you fight him? Why'd you get mad? What was it? And then you say, okay, well, if this person says something about you, your reaction was to hit him. What was the consequences? Well, I was suspended. I got in trouble. Say, did you like that? No. Well, what's something else that we can do? And then as you start to talk about what are the other possible consequences, what are the other possible interventions, you walk them step by step. And then what I tell kids is, don't just say what sounds good. Oh, I'm going to walk away, or I'm going to tell a teacher. Because 9 times out of 10, you're not going to do that. It sounds good, but when the rubber hits the road, you reflect, you regress back to what you normally do. So what we try to do is get realistic type of spots. What can I do? You know what? I'm just literally going to move away from this person. I'm going to let a teacher know if he comes in my area, I'm probably going to hurt him. So please keep him away, and then see how these things work. So when you say what are some other interventions that can be done, it's a matter of thinking. If I can get the child to thinking, that's half the battle right there. What I try to tell them is this. It's a race between your emotional brain and your rational brain. Your emotional brain is reflexive. That means it's going to act before it think. Okay. And that's the way it's done, because in our emotional brain, what it is only one sensory input from what we see and what we hear to how we act. Our rational brain, it takes 2 different steps to go through a thinking process. So we see it, we think about it, and then we act. So what we tell them to do is get time and space. That's why you hear people say, if you get upset, count. Why is that? Because it's giving your time, brain, literally to think. It looks crazy, it sounds crazy, but what we're trying to do is to step back. So what I always try to tell a lot of my young men, a lot of my young ladies who are impulsive, who act emotionally and do something from a reflective point, say, try to see things happening. What you have to do is be able to predict what somebody may say or might do. You know who the troublemakers are is. You see that person, that teacher come into class, look like she's in a bad mood. Let me step back. Let me not be the one to agitate her. Let me not be the one to poke the bear, so to speak. So what we're trying to do is to be predictive in nature, try to remove ourselves from situations as much as possible. And I let them know, even if you do everything that you can, bad things can happen. So let's say something bad happens. Now what we have to do, we take a step back and say, where did it go wrong? What could have done better? And if we're honest with ourselves and we look, once we're calmed down, we can say some things that we could have done. So what we do is we dissect the problem and we look and see what we could have done. And that's where, again, that rational, that thinking brain has to come in. If this situation pops off again, something similar, you got to say, hey, been there before. Put my hand on the stove. It was hot. I see it's red now. That means it's hot. I'm not going to touch it. We learn from our mistakes.
We got Dr. Ramel Freud up here in the studio. But I appreciate that information, because it really kind of broke some things down for me to help me better understand how to deal with ADHD, what it is. And my next question, or not my question, but I just want to offer this. Do you think that setting study times for children, consistency, perhaps a parent need to change a classroom setting for a child if they're not functioning well in one setting?
Yeah. What you want to do is you want to be preventative in nature. I knew my daughter had a lot of extra energy when she was starting school. I put her in a Montessori school. Now, Montessori school allows kids to roam where you don't have to sit in the seat. You can go from station to station. You have different flexibility, and that's what she needed. Once she got into the 2nd grade, I could see that she had started to slow down. She was ready for a more traditional classroom, and that the Montessori would probably not be the best. So now she's in Golden My Year, where it's a little bit more of a structured setting. So as a parent, what you have to be able to do is to read your child, understand your child, and to try to put them in places to succeed before the problem begins. We don't want to wait till there's a problem. What we want to do is anticipate the problem and then try to prevent the problem. So when you start talking about what are those things you can do, well, that goes with it. Getting proper rest, getting proper exercise, the proper diet, all those things that we consider little things have big results. You say, my child is active, but look what we're feeding them. You're giving them sugar for cereal. You're giving them carbs, which breaks down into sugar. Okay. And then we expect them to go sit down in the class and to be still and quiet. We set our kids up with failure with our diet. What time do they go to bed? What are they watching? What's the things that stimulate in their minds and what they're doing? So what we have to do is to be very careful. You should have a regimented sleep time. And these are things that sometimes, unfortunately, our life does not allow us to do. But as much as possible, you want to have a diet that's best for your food, for your children. You want to have a regular sleep time. And then you also want to have that exercise time with the First Lady, Michelle Obama, talking about 60 and fit. the more energy that they release in that playing field outside is the better for them. But what do we have now? We have such a sedentary lifestyle where people live on the couches. You have kids who will play a video game for 8 hours. They watch movies and television for those other hours, and then they have all of this energy inside of them stored and whatnot. So that's part of the problem of what we have to do, what we're putting in our children's mind.
So not only what we put in their minds, but what we're putting in their bodies.
Oh,
because there's been a long debate about whether or not what sugar causes ADHD. Now that's about causing, and that's different than sugar exacerbating the symptoms of ADHD or hyperactivity. And so WebMD, there's a number of resources that I looked at, but I want to talk a little bit about the ADHD diet and some of the foods that
those diet foods are horrible. Flaming hot Cheetos.
Oh, I love hot Cheetos.
Anything with dye on it, Doritos, those things that we love.
Soda.
Horrible. Yeah, soda. I mean, because you look at the excess sugar, you look at the dye, and it's like we're setting our children up for failure. But it's not just us. It's if we just real talk, it's the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. I know exactly what's going into the foods in which we eat. They say you are what you eat. Well, then we beef our beef, our chicken, all our pigs, our pork with hormones, with steroids, with antibiotics to prevent them from the hormones, to protect them for that, and sell those to it. Well, those are the same very things that we're eating. Why don't we want our athletes on steroids? Well, because we see what it does to them from an emotional and a physical standpoint. But you put your cows on steroids, and then you put it in McDonald's, and then what do? We eat McDonald's every day. Well, we're eating those same steroids. We're eating those same hormones. That's why it's called fast food, because it's convenient. And when you live in a microwave generation that we live in, it's about convenience. And even us as adults, people say, man, I ain't giving up my McDonald's. That's because we can't. It's a drug. We know it's not good for it, but you know what? It tastes good. So you know what? Somebody tell me to stop. I don't care what you saying.
I came to this show today. I found I'm all kind of addicts. I got issues. But, I want to talk a little bit more about that food because I'm looking at the everyday health media, and it talks about that some of the common foods that cause ADHD reaction include milk, chocolate, soy, wheat, eggs, beans, corn, tomatoes, grapes, and oranges. It seems like just everything is on this list. Frosting is another big one, But this one kind of surprised me was fish and seafood because of the high mercury level,
But and see, that's it. It's not the foods specific in themselves, but it's what we do to those foods that's done it. So when you talk about eggs and milk, well, that goes back to the chicken and the cows that we're pumping with these drugs. You don't get that when you do human milk, when you do breast milk, and that's one of the reasons why breast milk fed kids are healthier in what they do. They can have a better endurance and resistance towards other diseases that other kids don't. So when we start to look at those things as parents, we have to be very careful. But when you look specifically in our urban environment, we're talking about living in food deserts. We talk about the foods that we get. The foods are horrible. But even if you go into some of the supposed stores that we think we're getting great food from, you go into a Whole Foods, into a Trader Joe, we're still getting a lot of those same things inside of that. Unless you're literally doing your own food now, we're all subject to these things. And then, so you talk about the preponderance. It's not just African-American males. Me and you had kind of talked about this off air. Well, why is this number going up before? Well, all kids, like I said, have this crazy burst of energy, but we were outside. We were riding our bikes. We were playing. We were doing things where, one, if it wasn't in the sight of the adults to get on their nerves. They say, go outside with that. Go do what you do. Right. And then you come back in, you're knocked out. That's why they would let us go outside from what they used to say in the country where I was from can to can't, from when you can see till you can't see. You go out there when them street lights come on, you come home, but then it's time to settle down. So when we start looking about just like the lifestyles that we live, that's one of the biggest things. So when we say, well, what did kids do in the past? Well, we had other natural remedies. We didn't have to put them on psychotropic interventions. And I just want to make this clear. I'm not saying that medication is never an answer, because there are some possibilities where those things help. But I also tell parents, if you're ever going to put your child on a medication, I would never put my child on anything stronger than a stimulant. They would never go on an antidepressant. They would never go on on an antipsychotic. Why? Because they never tested test those on children. They test those on adults, and then they try to do it on a scaled down version for adults. Antidepressants sometimes make the child more. It's something called a black box study that showed that being on antidepressants made children more likely to commit suicide.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about what would I do, if they were on a psychostimulant, one, they would be on one that I measure, but then also I would be getting regular readings from whether it's the psychiatrist, or the pediatrician. What's their liver looking like? What's their kidney looking like? What's their blood levels looking like? I'm looking at them for their endurance, and I'm going to have them in conjunction in therapy. Are they receiving therapy? Because I want the medication to act as a cast, as a temporary salve until we learn some other things, until we mature a little bit more, and then we could go. It shouldn't be a one time you're on and then you're on for life.
For life, right. So at some point you think they should graduate off that. It should be weaned off of that. And I hear about
Everybody
drug holidays.
is different.
I hear
Yeah.
about drug holidays, because some of these side effects of some of these drugs can stunt your
your
growth.
growth.
Can stunt your
Yep.
growth, and some people don't know that. I know some of the kids I've cared for in foster care that during the summertime they'll be taking off some of these drugs that they're on. Okay, we have a caller, and I know our time is getting short, and there's a couple things I want to do, but before we take the caller, I want to say in terms of children being on these psychotropic medications and special education, that there is no concrete evidence that suggests medication improves the learning outcomes for children. So that
I mean,
medication
there's a study for everything. I'll be perfectly honest with
Okay.
you. So if I'm a debater and I want to tell you that, I can tell you that some kids who've been diagnosed with ADHD, if they've been put on medication, that they've had a better outcome in life as it relates to high school graduation, as it relates to college graduation, job retention, marriage satisfaction and retention, compared to those who are diagnosed and not. But to all of those studies, there's always those caveats, those things that they don't say, what were some of the other precipitating factors that really cause for that. So
All right.
so what we have to do is look at not so much studies, but anecdotal information, what we know in common sense.
All right. We have a caller that's on the phone. Caller, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Hi, Jermaine. This is Jennifer Wilder. How are you?
I'm doing great. How you doing, Miss Wilder?
I'm doing good. Just wanted to call in and say that congratulations for your show. I really, really support it. I think you had some great guests on today.
Oh,
And I would like, to also find or get more information regarding, the person that was doing and talking about the ADHD. I think because I do work with a lot of mental health young people, and I would just like to get more information on that, especially when he's talking about, the medication and things like that, other avenues that you could take.
Okay. Dr. Ramil Smith and from Blacksmith.
Yeah, Blacksmith. My phone number is 414-699-5570. But as Jermaine has stated before, three things that I would do for a quick thing. WebMD on ADHD will be very, very helpful. And then also if you look up DSM-5, that's the number 5, DSM-5 ADHD. That is that book I was referring to that gives you about a lot of the symptoms. And then 3, I would talk to my pediatrician, or I would talk to a psychiatrist, one who I trust, one who I care about. Our community just took a big loss with Dr. Lester Carter from Carter Drugs.
Yeah.
I would send a lot of my families there because he had a lot of herbal remedies. It was one that was called the 10. That was a homeopathic issue where I told my parents this. I said, if it doesn't work, you don't have to worry about any side effects. But if it works, it's good. And so it was different for everybody. But if you look under that, there are homeopathic interventions in which you can use as an alternative to psychotropics. And then also, like I said, there's interventions from cognitive behavioral therapists that I think are very, very helpful. And when you work in conjunction with the schools and the families, I think things can really happen in a great way.
All right. Thanks a lot, Jennifer, for calling. And we'll make sure that you get connected to Dr. Smith. I know we're going to actually have to continue this conversation on a later date because it's such a huge topic, because I would like to know if there's a relationship between ADHD diagnosis, the prison industrial complex, incarceration, juvenile incarceration. I also would like to know, for children who are taking psychotropic medication, is there a likelihood or greater chance that they will use illicit drugs in their adult years because of the addiction severity and just I'm just curious.
The quick answer is it really depends on who's monitoring the medication. If there's just abuse, there's neglect where nobody knows exactly what's going on, it leads to that exactly. But like I said, when there's therapy, when there's people who's letting the child know exactly what that's for, let them know it's not the medication itself, because this is the thing. The medication, I tell children, medication doesn't help you. What's supposed to happen is there's a part of the brain that lies dormant. When you take the medication, it lights up that part of the brain. So even when the medication is on, it's still up to the child to make the decision yes or no. So it's not the medication. So I take the power away from the medication, let them know that whether you're on this medication or not, it's still you who's making the decision. It's just sometimes the brain, we talked about different parts of the brain lighting up. There is scientific evidence to say when a kid takes that it wakes up different parts of the executive function in the frontal lobe.
Okay. Last week we had talked about special education and getting some advocacy support from different resources in the community. Wisconsin Facets is one of those. Wisconsin Family Assistance Center for Training and Educational Support. Their phone number is 877-374-0511. 874-374-0511. That's Wisconsin Facets, Family Assistance Center for Training and Education Support. We also would like to give, just pay homage to the legacy of one of the great advocates in our community, leaders, mother in our community, former state representative Annette Polly Williams. You know, we just really suffered a great loss. And then Dr. Carter, just people who have paved the way for us. We just want to take a moment to salute them. Today, this month is November, is Adoption Awareness Month. And just want to congratulate to Miss Gerda, who adopted 2 children today. And congratulations. She's provided a lovely supportive home. She's one of our Fresh Start family providers. And so if you're interested in foster care, and there is a need for foster care, there's this conversation that's out there that there's not enough resources in the central city. And so that justifies sometimes the removal of children to faraway counties. And so if you're interested in caring for children who have been abused, neglected, or even wrongly displaced by some, and we need to get more resources so that we can keep children connected to their community and their culture, you can give Fresh Start a call at 414-351-1100, 414-351-1100. Also want to let you know that Fresh Start is holding a recruitment fair on this Saturday, and you can call 414-351-1100. That's going to be from 10 to 11:30. Call 414-351-1100. I also want to make the community aware. I have another announcement. The Milwaukee Child Welfare is hosting a listening session on Quality Parenting Initiative Wednesday, November the 19th at 1 o'clock p.m. And that's going to be at 4425 Northport Washington Road, Suite 400. I believe that's the UWM Training Center. And then also, we need to hear from you. We need you to Facebook us at Fresh Start Today. You can tweet us at Fresh Start 860. You can email us your questions or your comments, suggestions for future shows by emailing freshstart860@gmail.com. It's been a great show, and can't wait to have Dr. Ramel Smith come back. And then also we're going to be having conversations with Dr. Jawanza Kunjufu once a month on the show. And so we're going to be having some very engaging conversations, but we need to hear from you. Thanks a lot, Milwaukee. Be safe and be blessed.